How many people get married, young and stupid, and at some point within 6 months or a year go, "What the heck did I just get myself into?" It happens, right? And that's exactly what happens in a franchise.
Welcome to the Measure Success podcast, where we feature top leaders on how they measure success in their business and life. Now, let's learn from their experiences.
Welcome to the Measure Success podcast, where we talk with top leaders about effective strategies that inspire success. Very excited to have here with us today Lance Graulich. He is one of the authors here of Luminary Leadership. He also, though, very impressively, has done a lot of things. He's like what I call the master franchisor. I mean, he's done Wingstop, Krispy Kreme, Pink Box Donuts, on and on and on. And he like lives this. I think my favorite part you just said beforehand is like, I'm working so hard, still working so hard, even though you don't have to work hard. You're just driven and you're like going at least on a vacation somewhere each month, which is just absolutely fantastic. That's a good way to give back. Good for you. I like that. That is a good goal that I'd like to do as well. Cause, you know, my wife doesn't care when I go on a little thing, but she like wants to go into the fun things. You know, she's not interested in going, forgive me here, of any, you know, going to Butte, Montana. You know, I mean, she wants to go to something interesting. So,
Mexico.
Exactly. So, to go to the fun stuff. So Lance, we're just going to pop right in to do the fun stuff. What's the most messed up franchise experience that you had?
Jeez. Me personally?
Yeah.
You know, I joined a franchise. Now I'm not going to even tell you the name of which one it was, although you mentioned a couple. I got invited into a franchise by a super smart guy that had an MBA, had an amazing career in finance. And, you know, look, the end of the day, anybody can jump into any franchise, but there is a learning curve, you know? And in this situation, he really didn't have an idea on how to manage hourly restaurant employees. And his house got robbed by the employees. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. But thankfully, this business had a lot of volume. So he finally brought me in full time, you know, made me a deal I couldn't refuse as a partner. And I helped build it up to a $25 million a year company across a couple of states with different restaurants. But man, you talk about a screwed up experience. This poor guy was just trying to be a leader in the restaurant business, in the franchise space. His house got robbed. He was losing money left and right due to inefficiencies, you know, theft out of the cash register, of course. I mean, if his house is getting robbed, you can imagine what's going on in the restaurant. So it was a terrible experience for him, and I loved helping him, using my experience and helping him in it. But look, franchises can go wrong for a lot of people. There's a lot of people that get into franchises and right away, like a bad marriage. How many people get married, young and stupid, and at some point within 6 months or a year go, "What the heck did I just get myself into?" It happens, right? And that's exactly what happens in a franchise. I have a franchise right now, one of the hottest franchises out there. They have a resale. Everybody loves resale businesses, right? One of my clients, I put him into that resale, and you know, he's like, "So what happened here?" And I said, "What happened is the guy got into it and had no idea what he was getting himself into." You know, like a marriage, when you get into any business, franchise or otherwise, you don't want any surprises. Exactly what you teach, Carl. You want a plan, strategic or otherwise. I swear some people think they only have a cocktail napkin to write on when it comes to a plan. That's not always sufficient.
No, I know it's you know, it's so funny you talked about that because the napkin, right? I literally, this is the irony of what that statement you just made there. I actually found my napkin for 40 strategy. Isn't that the irony of all ironies? I mean, it's like I literally found it the other day. It was like, oh my gosh, I actually did this. I wrote my business plan of 40 strategy on a napkin.
Well, that shows our age because now we have a digital file in our phone. We can easily write it.
Yes, of course. But it's crazy of that classic. But you're right. It's like there's a difference between a vision and a plan. It's like we want to have a great vision. I think a lot of people, especially in what you do in franchising, it's an exciting idea, right? Hey, I'm gonna buy this put together concept, right? Ideally have some strong SOPs, and I'm gonna just make this thing fly and I become a millionaire.
And there's a great due diligence process for it. People ask me all the time, how do I know which is right for me? I said, it's just like dating. Allow me to introduce you to these brands, and they all have a great process. It's not a short process. You talk to different people and you decide, allow them to prove to you what value their brand has. I had a guy this morning that says to me, I'll only find value if they have a call center that sells for me and actually takes the credit card and makes the sale for the service. I said, that's funny enough. President of Lawn Squad is just going to be on my podcast next week, and that's exactly what they do. He goes, oh, that sounds interesting. Tell me more. Everybody's got a thing. Everybody's looking for something. And when people are crawling around the United States, if you will, looking at Biz Buy Sell and all kinds of websites, I just want an existing business. But why? So if you get an existing independent business, are you that good that you know exactly how to take that business to the next level? And in some instances, if the business was doing well and you just got $1.5 million SBA loan, you only put down 10% in a lot of cases. High interest rates these days. If you screw that up, you're going to be in deep trouble.
Oh, for sure. It's okay. So I am curious about that. Kind of, if you made that matching process. So, how many times have you heard, "Do something you love"? Right? You hear that, and it's you smile. Yeah, right, yeah. But do something you love, and then there's find something where you can make money at. Right? Find something you have a passion with. When you're heading down this path of trying to find the best connection, right, for somebody who's looking to go down this path, what's the most important thing?
Well, I start with somebody's what, and their what encompasses a couple of things. Number one, what will be their role in this business? Sounds like a crazy question, but there are people that are making a great living that hate what they're doing, but they don't want to give up the income because their risk tolerance is fairly low. So they'd rather stay at their day job and build something on the side, sort of the classic side hustle. The difference is this side hustle can turn into something huge. So 1 hour heating and air conditioning, one of my favorite brands, it's a powerhouse, and they have a whole system where you can keep your job and you hire a GM. So your role could be a part-time owner, a semi-absentee owner where you're spending 10 to 20 hours a week on the business. So what is your role? What is your investment? That's always funny. I ask people, what is your investment level you're planning to do here? How much cash do you want to put in? And some people try to tell me, well, that depends. I don't know that it really depends. Because did you tell your wife you're looking for a business? Your husband, you're looking for a business? And I'm working with a lot of women now, a lot of men, both sides of the coin. And I always make sure they're in sync on this because, you know, there is a certain amount of money that is a lot of money to certain people. So, let's say somebody wants to invest 50,000. And by the way, that's one of the biggest misconceptions. You don't have to be a millionaire to own a franchise. McDonald's, you need 500,000 liquid to get into McDonald's and you can get a loan. But I have tons of franchises you can do incredibly well with. I have a franchise a guy joined. He did 8 million in the first year, and it was a $200,000 investment. Now he had a little experience in that industry, full disclosure, unlike most owners that don't. So he didn't have that normal learning curve that everybody else has. So what is your investment? Is it a $50,000 cash investment, and then we'll get you an SBA loan? Is it 100,000? A lot of people I work with seem to have 100,000 cash they want to put in a business. That is unlimited. I have tons of businesses in that category. So what is the investment? What is your role? And then what are your skills? What are you good at? For example, I have citywide facility solutions. Put a bunch of people with sales experience. They did tech sales. Actually, the last two guys I placed for this particular brand citywide had tech sales. and experience. And they're killing it at Citywide. The average franchisee does $8 million in revenue. So I had my guy got a $300,000 SBA loan. He tried to pay with crypto, but that didn't work. And it was $300,000 SBA loan. He put down 20%. If it's not an existing business in the area and you're just following the system, you're typically gonna put down 20%. And he's killing it because his skills were perfectly aligned because of his sales experience and his people skills. Citywide is first thing they're looking for. Lance, just bring me people with sales ability that have a track record in sales. They don't care how long. And they've loved my candidates for that. So what are your skills? I work with engineers. There are certain brands that are a lot better suited for engineers than others, you know. But I just got a friend of mine in tech sales, also tech sales, it seems, in a senior home care brand. And this is the way a lot of my first discussions go. Right now, the majority of the audience is like, what? What is that? Well, a lot of people don't know. I unfortunately had to learn because both my parents passed away 5 years apart. And what do they have in common? We needed someone to help mom and dad in the home. We weren't available 24/7 to take care of them. Mom needed help when dad went first, and I came in to help. So senior care, it's like companion care, non-medical home care is all the rage. I have 20 brands I represent that do this. I know people doing $6 million a year in senior home care on a $150,000 investment to get started. Now, is there work, Carl? Yeah, of course there's work. That's, if you're 400 pounds and you're a guy and you want to get back to 200 pounds, is there work to getting to 200 pounds? There's work. There's also work to keeping yourself at 200 pounds. No difference for business.
Yeah. Okay. So, it's interesting. You've been throwing out some exciting numbers, but what's really matters is the net bring home, right? What people are bringing home from those.
Ultimate free.
Thank you. But I know this is a bit of a dumb question because every business is different. So I get it. And the results do literally vary. But if just generally speaking, forgive me here, but average franchise, what's a reasonable take home pre-tax, coming out of a successful franchise?
Yeah, it's super tough to even pinpoint the answer. And here's why. And I'll give you answers, but there's kind of a range. So in all franchise disclosure documents, franchising is regulated by the federal government. Every brand produces a fat franchise disclosure document every year. It's typically updated April, May, June, in that territory, that area. And in those 23 items, there's always an earnings claim. So brands might group like Citywide, the average franchisee does 8.3 million or whatever it is. But then there's a mean or a median. They'll throw out the top, then the bottom, and come up with a median. Most brands, when they're bigger, are not giving you any kind of information on net. That would mean that they have to audit all of their franchisees, and everybody's different. Carl, you and I know people that own businesses that have their entire family on payroll. They have 7 cars or more run through the business. They have insurance for the entire extended family in the business, and they're happy that they net 5%. So the answer to your question is any franchise, you can net 15 to 25%. Well, almost any franchise, you can net 15 to 25%. But what I tell people is that if the S&P 500, coming from a Wall Street family like I did, if the S&P 500 can yield 10.5% since the 50s, obviously there's a lot of ups and downs. 10.5% is typically my benchmark. Now, you don't have the privilege or the rights for any major write-offs, depreciation and expenses and things like that. So you could truly net 10% in a business and have all those write-offs, very little exposure to taxes because you've reduced your net and what have you. And a lot of people are really, really happy with that. I know very successful business owners, they hesitate and stumble when you ask their net. Obviously, they can use some Carl Cox advice, but I'm being very serious. A lot of people can't pinpoint their net because they're like, is it my real net or is it the numbers that I produce and, it's not that it's necessarily fraudulent, but you might have some overinflated things buried in that particular business, depending on. And at the end of the year, as you know, a lot of people are buying all kinds of things, trucks and equipment, and Section 179. They want to buy a big truck to write that off at the end of the year. So, you know. But anyway, but yeah, I mean, look, I tell people if you're shooting for 15% net, you can do that. It just depends how you run it. Now, if you're a full-time business owner, you have a shot at getting a lot higher net income. If you're getting absentee, then you're paying a team. But if you're keeping your income at your main job and you're making a good income, who cares if you only net 10%? At the end of the day, you're building equity just like a real estate investor, just like your personal residence, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah. I think that was a good answer. And I mean, I know it's hard to do those exact type things. It's what is it? It's so fascinating, right? Because at its core, what we're trying to do is create cash flow out of businesses to provide. But you said something that's a very interesting comparison. If you're running appropriately through appropriate tax, right? You're hiring your family that's going through it, right? That is income that is coming to your family that's being expensed against the business, but it's cash flow that's going ultimately to your checkbook, right? Or to your respective family checkbooks. And people sometimes misunderstand that, right? It's like, no, it's actually extraordinarily tax efficient. Might not look as pretty, so to speak, right? On the bottom line perspective, but when you net out the cash flow out of it, it's doing extraordinary, right? When you look at that, cash flow towards the individuals, so to speak, through
Yeah,
that
yeah.
process.
And what you typically do if that individual is going to exit their business, typically they're entitled to some sort of add backs, and franchises have, a system. The corporation, the franchisor understands the model of what it takes to run a successful business. So when you look at somebody's actual payroll run and you see all these extra bodies on payroll, you start to realizing it, you could figure it out. And that owner is technically entitled to add back the income from those individuals to the financial statements, it'll increase the purchase price, but it is fair if those people are not working in the business as much as we thought.
It's really interesting because, of course, I always like to ask the question, how do you measure success in business? I'm kind of curious from your standpoint of connecting people to make it work. How do you measure success in that? What is your measure of success from that perspective?
Such a great question. I have a new series as part of my podcast, kind of like what you've done with different podcasts. I have a series called Franchise Envy, where I interview just successful. It's just a series dedicated to successful franchisees. So it's funny. That was one of the initial thoughts I had is, there are a lot of franchisees out there that are outrageously successful, that are making millions and millions. I don't always like to feature those folks because some of that sounds so unrealistic to people. Like I know of a guy that exited for 100 million out of his franchise, another guy that exited for almost 110 million. Those are great stories still, but I'm interviewing people that making three, four, $500,000 a year. They've never been happier. They have more freedom. So when you ask if how I define success, you have the freedom to do exactly what you want, and you're never lacking the capital to do whatever you want. I've never once told my wife, "Hey, honey, sorry, we can't afford to go to Hawaii this year." Well, maybe I would have said that 30 years ago, but I'm 58, and where I am now in life. By the way, my favorite quote that I guess is a Lance quote. It's a Lanceism I learned from my family. Put yourself in a financial position to retire, and don't. And that's where I am. I could have retired. The heck am I going to do? I joke with my wife all the time. What are we going to do? Travel the world 5 times? We have no interest in that. We can go on a trip a month, whether it's domestically or abroad. That's enough. I mean, and I work too hard my whole life, but the measure of success, and the new Franchise Envy series isn't even out yet. I've recorded the first 6 or 7, and it's all about talking to people that have the ultimate freedom. They are their own boss. They live on their own terms. And there's a lot of misnomers. A lot of people talk about some people buy a job. That's okay for some people. Buy a business and buy a job is okay for a lot of people because you're still building equity. I know a guy that bought a franchise for $115,000. He worked it hard for 7 years. He sold for $1,200,000, $1,250,000, whatever it was. Essentially 10x his investment. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? And and then he moved on to be president of that particular franchise brand because he loved it. He loved the culture, and he wanted to help other people do the same thing because now he was happy and set. So everybody's measure of success might be a little different, but it's what is your lifestyle like? What do you like to do? Most people want to spend time with their kids and their family. We're empty nesters, so it's spending time with each other, my wife and I. Well, she works with me sometimes. She doesn't claim to work that hard for me.
No, I really appreciate actually that when I talk with people who go through this, I think you're the great example of it. Is you don't have to work anymore, but you're like, what else am I going to do, right? What is going to, yeah, and you love it when you love something, and it's I find it so fascinating of when they actually enjoy something. They're like, well, I feel like I have to retire. It's like, well, why do you have to retire? Just as long as you have the freedom, right? To do these other decisions.
I have to tell you this, and the audience needs to hear this. The Blue Zone series, I think it was on Netflix, talked about how this was about people living to 100 years or more. Why in some areas of the world do people live? They call them what? Centaurians. They live to 100 years or more. Why are there more in Sardinia and Loma Linda, California, where the Seventh-day Adventists are? There were certain areas. Sadly, that series was done long enough ago. Okinawa, Japan was another one. Sadly, some of those areas are no longer blue zones. I think they call them blue zones. They're not. Automation has changed them, so people aren't even living as long anymore, which is super, super sad. And the reality is the sense of community, the sense of purpose, and all those things is what makes people live longer. They have a purpose. And so retiring is no longer the plan. You mentioned earlier, passion for something. That was a big thing years ago. If you like kids, you get into business with kids or you become a teacher or whatever. That is not what it is today, in my opinion. And what I see and hear every day is, hey, I like kids, I like this, I like that, but how do I parlay that into something I can make a lot more money in? Not $100 million necessarily, but I want to live a comfortable life and control my own destiny. Well, I have businesses for that. And a lot of people use those skills and determine that they should get into senior home care, for example.
There's something we've been working on, and I love it. We call it $4 million strategies. And it's effectively a tool that helps you understand that there's EBITDA, right? Which we all understand, or, for those who do, it's earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization. Okay. Basically cash flow times a multiple. And the crazy part is people don't realize that multiple can increase if you have less risk in your business, right? And one of the beautiful things of franchisees is they typically have less risk. Because so many of the pieces of when you create it on your own are not built. The SOPs are not there. The market is not there. The branding is not there when you're doing something on your own versus when it's already existing. And it's so fascinating of how we blindly put money in the stock market, blindly. And you and I both know, Lance, the only people who are guaranteed to make money are the traders.
100%. That's where I started off on a
Yeah.
trade. Yes.
Yeah. But everyone else is just like, they're just riding this wave, hopeful, right? That nobody cares about debt ceilings. Dollars, right?
It's like the jobs report came out and crashed the market last week.
Right. So, but when you have something that is a business that actually is, I like to call them oil wells, right? You can make that decision of whether you want to be in and have fun through that process, or you want to just have this oil well on the side where you can choose or do either or both, right? That's why, once again, I love working with entrepreneurs, working with people, and once again, even people going to franchises, got so much of the risk is taken out which is increases the value of what you have.
Absolutely.
And the interesting part is you don't have to sell it, right? You can keep it if you continue to learn, if you, like you said beforehand, if you're willing to let go of things, right? And bring in the right team to help manage it, it can be a wonderful cash flow, for yourself. And if you're sick of it, yeah, of course you can get rid of it like anything else, but it's pretty powerful.
I have a friend that has 19 great clips hair salons, and he worked really hard in the beginning for a couple of years. My favorite story about him is that he's bald and doesn't know how to cut hair. And he worked really hard for the first couple of years, learning the business of the business, using his skills. He's got great people skills, hired the right people to run the salon. Now his daughter and her husband run the whole thing. They didn't exit.
Yep. Yep. And that's a great example there. And then now all of a sudden you have something that you can, once again, carry around. And retirement's taken, you don't have to worry about the stock market, because the best part is, for those who have hair, your hair grows all the time, needs to be cut. And so, yeah, it's a beautiful thought. All right.
One of the other things I have to inject here when you were talking about EBITDA and cash flow, what have you, if you're listening and you own an independent business, that's the other part of my business, is setting up businesses to franchise, to grow and scale for franchising. And a lot of people have one great business and they're afraid to make that next move. And of course, they need the Carl Cox help in that strategic plan to determine how they grow and what the options are. Franchising is the most amazing vehicle to grow. And I'll give you one example. Typically, historically, a franchisor can exit for 10 times cash flow, 10 times EBITDA.
And that's high, folks. That is high compared to the average. 3 is the average for a typical business.
And guess what? A franchisor recently exited for 30 times cash flow. He had $3 million cash flow. He had a special, cool home service brand and a unique niche. And a private equity group wanted him bad enough. He had a $3 million EBITDA, and he exited for $90 million. And normally on the franchisee side, you're going to exit for 3 to 5 times cash flow. I've got a couple of deals lately that are, anywhere from 3.5 to 5.5. Some of the heavy trade stuff like air conditioning and roofing and plumbing could go for 6 or 7 times cash flow.
Yeah, no, it's phenomenal. And that's that trade-off, right? People have to decide of how much is it worth trading off what you could be making versus what to do. And when you start getting what I call that stupid money, right? When you start getting 20x, it's like, yeah, I mean, you got to go. I mean, it's like, you got to go. I mean, there's just certain things unless once again, you can see it growing to the next level, but there's rarely times you get that.
Without giving up anybody's confidentiality, I had a guy, very bright guy in the restaurant business, a very specialized concept. That's all I'll say. I got him an offer of 14 million, just shy of 14 million. And a year later, the palette, so to speak, for the open market changed completely on that particular brand. And let's just say he can't get anywhere near that. And that happens often. Maybe it's a cyclical thing. Maybe it'll come back. But sometimes when you're up in that stratosphere, to your point, just take it.
I've been there several times and observed it several times and made that recommendation. Sal, you are not going to get this again. You're not going to get this again. Or you have to wait sometimes a decade to get it back again. And unfortunately, our greed gets to us. When it's fascinating, when everything's going good, we keep on thinking it's going to go good forever. And we talked about, there's Wall Street, there's interest rates, there are all sorts of risks that are out there. You can't control that. All of a sudden, something pretty doesn't look pretty anymore.
You just nailed it. Wall Street and the weather are two great examples, and Wall Street, there are corrections all the time. There are bubbles all the time. Real estate, same thing.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Final question here. And one of your favorite books you'd recommend for our audience?
The E-Myth by Michael Gerber is one of my all-time favorites. The Entrepreneur Myth or the Entrepreneurial Myth, amazing book. Good to Great, Jim Collins. I've heard you talk about it. Everybody talks about it. Good to Great is just already a classic. And if you go really way back for me, it was The 1 Minute Manager, Ken Blanchard.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a good one.
1 Minute Manager. So for all of you out there that are probably like me in the old days, when I was younger, going to be 58 this year, I wasn't really a great reader. It took me a long time to read and focus probably. The 1 Minute Manager is a really, really thin, great book. And there's a whole series. The 1 Minute Manager Meets the Monkey. Who Moved My Cheese is their series about change. I remember getting that from my father, who had his own Wall Street company. And I said, Dad, you got to read this. He goes, what are you trying to say? And I go, you have to read this.
That's fantastic. Lance, how can people connect and learn more about what you're doing?
I have a unique name, Lance Graulich. I'm everywhere. My podcast is Ion Franchising, EYE on franchising, and lancegraulich.com. But you can hit me up, DM me. You can DM me Carl and CARL, and I'll know where you found me. How about that?
Fantastic. Absolutely. Hey, Lance.
You know what I should
go
tell
ahead.
everybody? I got to tell everybody
Please.
that I have a free assessment. So if you're looking for a business, you're not sure what to do before you even talk to me, my services are free. I actually get paid by the brand, so you never pay me anything. But my free assessment that's on my website is all about your mindset, skill set, and life experiences. It's a fun 12, 15-minute little assessment. It gives you a nice report on yourself. So take it, learn something, and I'll be happy to reach out to you.
Lance, thank you for that benefit that you share with our audience. Lance is one of the best, truly one of the best in what he does, and I hope you've appreciated this podcast. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Lance.
Thank you, Carl. My pleasure.
And to everyone else who's listening, wishing you the very best at measuring your success. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Measure Success podcast. We'll see you again next time to learn from the best. Remember to subscribe now to get future episodes.